Thanks for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I want to jump right in today because we've got Gordon Chang with us. He is a Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow and the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. This is one of many books, though, Gordon. I'm so glad you're here today because obviously China is top of mind for everybody in Washington, D.C. And for those of us on the outside, we're kind of watching everything, all the strategy play out. And I know you have the inside track.
Well, thank you so much, Tudor. And happy Memorial Day.
Yes, happy Memorial Day to you as well. So as we watch what's going on, I mean, there's so much because we've got the tariffs, and certainly in Michigan, there are a lot of people that are concerned about the tariffs in general because a lot of the automotive parts come from China or they go back and forth. So there's great concern over tariffs on China being greater than any other country. But can you kind of break down for our audience why that is?
Well, most Americans assume this is peacetime. And yes, we're not actually in a war with China. China, however, is in a war with us. They've declared a people's war on us in May 2019. And that is propaganda. But for the Communist Party, it's important words. It has a phrase which has resonance that goes back before the establishment of the People's Republic. So we should consider ourselves not in peace, but at war. And in war, we have to take extraordinary measures to protect our society. So I can understand why people don't like the tariffs, and they certainly are going to hurt Americans. But this is going to be a sacrifice that all of us are going to make if we want to preserve our society.
Well, I think a lot of people don't like them because especially the younger generation has grown up with China making so much of our products, and it's so quick, it's so easy, it's so cheap. It all comes through Amazon and gets delivered right to your door. I found my kids were suddenly talking about Temu and Shein and all of these things, and they wanted to order all this stuff, and they had actually gone through their grandmother and, oh, can you get all this stuff for us? It was interesting though, because it came to the house. The quality was so bad. Even the girls were like, wait, what is this? This isn't what I got. No, actually, it is what you got. But I think that they see it from that standpoint. They don't understand how this impacts pharmaceuticals and intellectual property and all of these things. And we saw recently that, what's the guy's name Jack Dorsey, who was the prior owner of Twitter. He came out and he said he wants to get rid of all IP laws altogether. He was talking from the standpoint of technology and AI and all of that. People are so ignorant, though. They have no idea what that kind of thing could do to the United States of America, with China being filled with pirates as it is.
Well, yes. One of China's trade tactics, and one of the reasons why it's become so successful so fast, is because it steals U.S. intellectual property. It steals it to the tune of about $500 billion a year. That was the estimate of John Ratcliffe when he was Director of National Intelligence in December 2020. Now, we can argue whether it's $100 billion more or less, but the point is, this is America's future. And while, yes, the tech companies want to be able to use other people's intellectual property, we've got to protect it, because the reason why we have it is because inventors feel that they have protection for their work. And that means that they have an incentive to actually create something. So it's really important that we strengthen intellectual property laws, not weaken them.
And I do think that we have to be prepared for what is coming when it comes to AI, and making sure that we are making sure that the companies that are working on that are safe. We saw Donald Trump go to the Middle East. He made a big deal on not only AI, but data centers, all of this stuff that powers that type of technology, which could be the technology of the future, whether it is making movies or war. And you've talked before about the ability of China to shut things off through technology, shutting us down completely. A war, like you said, people don't think of us as being at war, but there is the possibility of coming in and shutting down our electronics, shutting down our energy. If we don't have an energy supply, we are a third world country.
Yeah, this is not a theoretical concern, because recently power inverters which are those devices that connect solar farms and wind turbines to our grid, they were shut down remotely from China. And China's been able to do this. And so this is
When was
no
that?
longer.
Where were we seeing that?
This was reported by Reuters, that the Chinese shut this down remotely. They didn't report where in the United States, but they reported that it was in the United States where this occurred. So this is something that we have to be acutely concerned about, because there are all sorts of devices that have been made in China, shipped to the United States, which have components that allow the Chinese to remotely control them. So, for instance, those big ship-to-shore cranes at our ports, more than 80% of them come from one company in Shanghai. And a year or so ago, the Wall Street Journal reported that some of these cranes had modems that were not part of the original specifications and which were not part of to help the cranes operate. So they shouldn't have been there, but they were. And those modems gave China the ability to remotely access those cranes. They could disable them or maybe cause those cranes to create damage at our ports.
Well,
So
I mean, doesn't that just kind of reinforce the idea that we should be more self-reliant than having all of this stuff constantly shipped in?
Absolutely. Another example, drones. There's one Chinese company from Shenzhen, DJI, that makes about 70% of the world's drones. Those drones can be used to basically surveil, because wherever that drone goes, China can seize. Now, people can disable some of those features that allow China to do that, but if they don't disable those features, then essentially every drone that has those features operating is a surveillance tool for Beijing. So they are mapping our country. We know that all of these Chinese migrants that have come in, they've come in at a time where we've seen Chinese nationals at increased tempo of them trying to get onto our military facilities. We've seen them with illegal surveillance of our bases. So they're looking at our vulnerabilities, they're seeing our patterns, and essentially this is planning for attack. And we should assume that this will occur.
When you say planning for attack, do you actually mean a physical attack, that they will come on U.S. soil?
Well, they're already here. So we believe
correct.
that there are People's Liberation Army and probably Ministry of State Security agents in large numbers in the United States planning attacks on America. So one of the first instances where we will have a hint that China plans to use force in East Asia will be attacks in the United States, going after our grid, going after starting wildfires, blowing up dams, explosions at shopping centers to create terror. All of these things can occur. And Tudor, in the December 2022, an alert building inspector in Reedley, California, which is near Fresno in the Central Valley, she discovered what is a Chinese biological weapons facility. And inside, federal and state authorities found at least 20 pathogens, probably more, including the one for Ebola, and almost 1,000 mice that have been genetically engineered to spread disease. I mention Ebola because we know that researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology are now studying Ebola, which means they're studying how to weaponize it. Ebola has a natural fatality rate of 50%. The good thing about Ebola is that it's not readily transmissible. But if the Chinese can figure out how to make it more transmissible, more contagious, then they will have a weapon that will be able to kill massive numbers of Americans.
That is shocking to me, because it makes me think about the fact that Joe Biden spent 4 years through the pandemic and after the pandemic, not holding China accountable, having no discussions with China on this. In fact, I would say defending China in many different instances when people were saying, oh, wait a minute, why aren't we holding them accountable to the pandemic? Why aren't we holding them accountable to this trade imbalance? Now you have Donald Trump, who has implemented the tariffs. And I think you've pointed out that he did offer China an off-ramp to the tariff war, but they decided they didn't want that. There's that's still a back and forth right now with the tariffs on Chinese products. But when you talk about essentially, you're talking about terrorist attacks and the bioweapons. Is there going to be will Donald Trump hold China accountable for the pandemic?
Well, I hope so. First of all, in his first term, he withdrew from the World Health Organization. The reason why that was important was that China used the WHO to spread the disease beyond China's borders. Twice in January of 2020, the WHO propagated China's narrative, which senior doctors at the WHO knew was not true. China's narrative was that SARS-CoV-2, the pathogen that causes COVID-19, was not readily transmissible human to human. So there is a January 9th statement and a January 14th tweet from the WHO which said, don't worry about this. That was at a critical time, and that lulled health officials around the world, including those in America, not to take precautions that they otherwise would have, which means that a disease that should have been confined to the central part of China became a global pandemic. That 7 million people outside of China were killed by a disease, and that it's 1.2 million Americans. The reason why all of this is important is that Joe Biden, when he became president, he put the U.S. back into the WHO, the organization that helps spread this disease. And the reason why all of this is critical right now is that China knows it's killed 7 million people, all foreigners, who now there's no deterrent for spreading the next disease that Chinese technicians and scientists are cooking up in labs like the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
So do you think that was a planned test?
No, my guess is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was a military facility. That disease, my guess, a lot of Chinese nationals will tell you it was a test, that they deliberately spread it into China to kill off old people and then rest of it. I don't think so. I think what happened was they were careless at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and we know that even before the pandemic. And what happened is this disease got out into the Chinese public. Xi Jinping then made a decision. He knew that his country was being devastated by COVID. He wanted to even the playing field. China has something called comprehensive national power. It's a series of metrics that measure the strength of countries. And there's two ways to become stronger. One of them is you make yourself stronger. The other is you make others weaker. And that's what Xi Jinping did. Xi Jinping did two things. For at least 5 weeks in December 2019 and January 2020, he told the world that this was not a contagious disease when he knew that it was highly transmissible human to human. And then while he was locking down his own country, lockdowns are controversial, but by locking down his own country, he was telling the world he thought that was an effective way of stopping disease. So while he was locking down China, he was forcing other countries to take passengers from China without restrictions. Tudor, you put those two things together, and it shows that the spread of COVID-19 beyond China's borders was deliberate. So I believe that Xi Jinping decided that he was going to weaken the rest of the world by spreading this disease outside of China.
I've got more coming up with Gordon Chang, but first let me tell you about my partners at Ease. Great news. President Trump's executive order slashing the cost of prescription drugs is going after the price gouging for drugs like insulin with Obamacare. You've heard me on the show introduce to you our healthcare partner, Ease for Everyone, which is a solution to what President Trump is fighting for today and every day. Listen to these simple facts. With Ease for Everyone and a monthly cost as low as $262, you get over 400 prescription drugs for free. Not lower cost, but no cost, $0. Plus huge savings on many other brand names. And you actually get to keep your doctor. Thanks for nothing, Obama. You get free unlimited virtual primary care visits and unlimited urgent care visits for a $30 copay and a generous cashback reimbursement for surgeries and hospital stays, including ICU visits, emergency room visits, and ambulance transportation and doctor's visits. And That's $262 a month. And you keep your doctor, you get over 400 prescription drugs for free. Visit easeforeveryone.com/tutor and join today. That's easeforeveryone.com/tutor. Now stay tuned. We've got more after this. China has a weakened economy already. I mean, we've heard rumblings that they are not economically sound right now. Why? I mean, obviously coming out of the pandemic, that's not good, but why not negotiate with Donald Trump if you're already in a poor position economically? Isn't a trade war just going to hurt them even more?
Yes, it will hurt them even more. And the Chinese economy, I believe, now is contracting. And we can see this from, for instance, price data from February, March, and April, which shows that China's in a deflationary spiral. Deflation is an economy killer, and it is inconsistent with China's reports of robust economic growth. To answer your question, I think that Xi Jinping has put himself into a position where he has to do the worst thing possible. And the reason is, for half a decade at least, he's been telling the Chinese people and other senior Chinese leaders that due to his policies, that China has surpassed the United States. Now, he can't be seen to negotiating with the United States in good faith because he's told everybody he doesn't have to. So I think that he has configured the Chinese political system so that only the most hostile answers are considered to be acceptable, and he cannot deal in good faith with us. And by the way, he isn't. On May 12th, China and the United States jointly negotiated and announced an agreement, and China has already violated that agreement. So really what we're talking about is Xi Jinping who can't deal cooperatively with the United States or with the rest of the world.
Well, who are his allies right now? Because there's rumblings that he's working with Putin. There's rumblings that he's working with North Korea. There's also rumblings that he's working with Iran. This is like the axis of evil. So who are the allies of the Chinese?
Well, China technically has only one military ally, and that's North Korea. But clearly, China, Xi Jinping is on the same wavelength as Vladimir Putin. One can even argue, as I do, that the Ukraine war is actually a proxy contest where China is trying to destabilize Europe through Putin. We see the same thing. China has fully supported Iran in its assault on Israel. So that's October 7th. China has been supporting Pakistan in the 4-day conflict with India. And China has been fielding insurgencies in North Africa that look like wars. So Xi Jinping has been trying to destabilize the world. And that goes back to sort of the Maoist playbook. So those are his friends. Those are the instruments that he uses. And his goals are malign.
I think when you're in the United States, sometimes you can see just the dynamics of how China and the U.S. interact. You just kind of look at how the U.S. is interacting with all of these other foreign leaders in foreign countries. But bringing up the fact that China would want to destabilize Europe and to use Russia as kind of their useful idiot to go into Ukraine and destabilize Europe and Eastern Europe, and then obviously Western Europe as well. I mean, really, you're getting everybody involved because now the entire world is focused in on what is Putin going to do. And they were very effective in manipulating the United States because, look, it impacted our entire political system for years, having people go back and forth on it. Are you with Ukraine? Are you not with Ukraine? Now we have this similar situation with Israel and Palestine. In the last few days, we've seen this horrific murder in Washington, D.C. of these two people who were at the museum, the Israeli museum. They were a young couple just about to get engaged, American, and I believe the man was from Israel. Is that correct?
I think so.
When you see that happening on U.S. soil, and this is something that we haven't really discussed on the podcast, but it shook me waking up to that news. I think we are so desensitized to seeing a murder on the streets of New York or a murder on the streets of DC that it's easy to overlook the fact that this is a terror attack. This is a mindset. This is someone who is radicalized on U.S. soil. And when you start to hear really the teachings that come from the socialist group that is on college campuses, and they have infiltrated these college campuses, and they are using, they really, the reality is they don't actually care about the Palestine-Israel war. They are using that as a way to radicalize these kids and force the nation, destabilize the United States and force the nation into a socialist economy. I don't know why this is not getting more attention, that this is not just a random act. This is someone who was radicalized by a group that is on our college campuses. And when we talk about Harvard, and when we talk about the University of Michigan, where we just had this happen, and the Attorney General arrested these people and then let them go, we have a real problem. It's not free speech. It's a real problem on our college campuses where someone got to the point where they decided to go murder a young couple in cold blood on the streets of the United States Capitol.
Yes, the U.S. Capitol is not safe. To your broader point, foreign agents are working and feel emboldened. Just to give you an example, 2023, President Biden's 9/11 deal with Iran. As a part of that, Biden gave clemency to 5 Iranian operatives, and he allowed 3 of them to stay on U.S. soil at a time when other Iranian operatives were trying to kill the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and other senior State Department officials. And as we subsequently learned, Iranian officials were trying to murder Donald Trump. So really, this is, to me, indescribable. Why Biden would allow these dangerous elements to stay in our country. And, we know that China has been behind a lot of this Islamic radicalism, fueling it. So, for instance, on Chinese-owned TikTok, of the videos on Hamas, 96.5% of them support the terrorist group. That's because China's been manipulating the curation algorithm of TikTok to support the Palestinian quote unquote cause. So this is being directed from Beijing. There are so many examples of this infiltration of our society, and it's going to be very difficult, but we have to remove these elements of the Chinese Communist Party. We have to remove the Iranians. We have to remove the Russians, because they are here to take down our country, not just to destabilize us, but to actually take down the United States of America.
Well, and I think that people are realizing that we're close to that. If they get a few more people on that team, they are closer than I think the average person thinks to wrecking our way of life and getting in there and destroying that. I come from Michigan, so we have a big Arab American population here. And the thing that breaks my heart over this situation is that when I talk to my friends there, they're like, look, we want peace. And Donald Trump my friends who are supportive of Donald Trump has said that he wants peace too. We want peace. This movement is not most of these people are people who have no connection to that region whatsoever. And they have been radicalized by an idea, but it's something they don't fully understand. And instead of wanting peace like these guys do, they want to ratchet things up. They want to, they're looking, I mean, you're not looking for peace if you're murdering someone in cold blood on the sidewalk after an event.
That's right. And we have foreign elements fueling this. It's difficult for our society to deal with it because every time we try to, someone screams racism. But we've got to remember that we've got dangerous elements in our country, and we have to either imprison or expel them because we're getting to the point where they can create the worst outcomes for us. So this is absolutely essential. And a lot of people don't like this. They're targeting a group, but unfortunately, for instance, China has weaponized Chinese nationals on our soil against us. And we have to understand that this is something that we have to look at with a China focus. It's not we're racist. It's Chinese regime has taken these nationals and turned them against us and has compelled them to commit crimes against the United States. This is difficult for us to deal with, but we're going to have to do it if we want to save our country.
What is the average life like in China? And I ask this because every private high school I know in the United States has Chinese exchange students. And that seems to be the number one group from other countries. The number one group of international students comes from China. And I think, well, what kind of a lifestyle do you have there if you get to send your child to America to study for high school? Because I would imagine you have to be somewhat affluent to do that. And in that case, then you probably have a connection to the Chinese government, because my impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, my impression is that if you are in a position where you are allowed to send your child out of the country to America to study, you must be given that permission by the Chinese government, and you must have a certain amount of money from your experience with the Chinese government. And if that is the case, are we just being naive taking all of these international students from China?
Yeah, those are great points, because you're right. I mean, for a Chinese national to come to the United States, they need a passport, which is issued by the Chinese central government. And as you point out, the students who are coming and studying in our high schools and our colleges and universities, they're affluent because by and large, they are paying the entire tuition and cost of their education. The way to get rich in China is to manipulate relationships with the regime, or actually be a member of the Communist Party. So there's a lot of that. You know, we have seen, and there's a lot of different explanations for the Chinese nationals who are in our country. I mean, some of them who've come across the borders, both northern and southern ones. Some of them are just desperate Chinese who managed to make it their way out and want to live in a free society. Others, it's apparent that they are People's Liberation Army, Ministry of State Security, and are coming here to take us down. And then you have, your 277,000 Chinese students on our campuses. About 13% or so of them commit espionage, and they are compelled.
How do you
to
know that?
Just studies have been done on this. And this has been studied, and obviously you can't get a precise number, but that is an estimate. We got to remember that the Chinese regime compels Chinese students to commit espionage. And there are two things. First of all, there's the 2017 National Intelligence Law of China, which requires every Chinese national to spy if given a demand to do so. But more important, there's the Communist Party's top-down system, whereby every Chinese citizen has got to obey commands of the Communist Party. So this is bad. But we've got to remember, though, that this is also a U.S. issue. And the reason is we've known that the Chinese consular officials and Ministry of State Security agents surveil Chinese students, and we've allowed that to occur. And we know what the Chinese regime is doing in terms of not only monitoring, but coercing Chinese students into committing crimes against the United States. So this is really on us as well. And we have got to dismantle those Chinese networks that surveil and monitor and coerce Chinese students.
Well, I'm not giving us a pass on this by any means, but don't you think that the culture that Americans grow up in is so counter
Permissive.
to that we can't even imagine our government asking us to spy? It's something that I think is so countercultural that we reject the notion because we think it's impossible.
Oh, absolutely. And you made a really critical point. We do not understand the Chinese regime. And because we don't understand it, we've allowed it to infiltrate our society. And our general norms of what we believe prevent us from acting effectively against a regime that is here to destroy us. So we are going to take measures which, most Americans would consider to be extraordinary, but which I believe are absolutely necessary to protect us. And because we are not taking those measures, I fear for the future.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, is this something that on the outside looking in, we're all going, gosh, this is terribly scary. And you talk about the lab that was found in the United States. And this all seems, I mean, when you start talking about bioweapons, it feels like that hits so quick and it spreads so fast that once it's here, there's really no way to combat it. So in my mind, I'm like, well, there must be an entire government agency dedicated to keeping us safe. But is there?
Unfortunately, no. Well, there are government agencies that have that as their mission statement, but unfortunately, we are not prepared to do that right now. And so, we have, as I just give you an example, President Trump was very good in his second term. He got us out of the World Health Organization again, but we have yet to impose costs on China for spreading COVID. And as I mentioned before, Xi Jinping now knows that he killed 1.2 million Americans with COVID, and there was no cost imposed on China. So we've got to go beyond that. Now, President Trump, while he was out of office between his two terms, actually talked about reparations. And for most Americans, that would be going far, much too far. But the point is, we need to create, in some way, Tudor, whether it's reparations or something else, we need to create that deterrent, because we know the Chinese are working on diseases. They're going to weaponize Ebola or something else. And we could very well be hit with another epidemic. And that epidemic is going to be more deadly than COVID. So it's for us, it's on us.
You make such a good point, because I asked you earlier, well, was that just a test? And even you said likely not, but even if it's not, it ultimately was, because they learned from it. So now they've learned that we're not going to come back. There was no punishment. And there was no punishment worldwide. There was no global response to China saying, what are you going to do? I don't even feel like I have that assurance that they were like, you know what? Huge mistake. We totally screwed this one up. This is what we're going to do to ensure that can never happen again. Has that happened?
No, of course not. And, the one global institution that is meant to, where health is its mission, which is the World Health Organization, was complicit in this spread, because WHO doctors knew from the get-go in January 2020 that COVID-19 was highly transmissible. And yet that institution was spreading China's narrative when it knew it was wrong. So we really have this global health institution, which is responsible in part for the pandemic. And
I just don't understand. You can be tried for war crimes. I mean, the entire globe can come after you if you commit war crimes. How can it be that if you are so careless with research that you can kill off millions of people, that there are no repercussions, that there's no global council that says, hey, wait a minute, you can't do this?
7 million people outside of China died from COVID. We can argue about the number, and people say, well, it's controversial about how many people actually died from COVID. But any number above zero is unacceptable. So we are talking in the millions. And this is, if you want to put another point on it, because Xi Jinping was targeting a specific group, which was non-Chinese, this technically qualifies as a genocide. This is more than the Third Reich's genocidal total. So,
but I mean, You've got the Uyghur genocide. You've got quite a bit. There's so many human rights offenses there, and I know I've kept you a little long. I just want to say, I think that there is a problem with us here in the United States, especially. I would say my generation lived through 9/11. We saw the impact of the racial conflict that happened because of that, and the prejudice that occurred out of 9/11, because I do think that a lot of people went, oh my gosh, if that person did it, then people that look like that might also do it. And my generation, I think, is so conscious of that now that we don't ever want that to happen. We don't want a group to be discriminated against in the United States. And I think that's what you're saying is, when we hear Donald Trump say, we're going to go after these people and make sure the bad guys are out of the country, there are so many Americans who because our culture is to say, we want to be inclusive, we want to be loving, we want to allow everybody their freedoms, that we're naive to the dangers. But there's this innate feeling of like, we don't want this prejudice to come back.
Yes, and that's what our enemies exploit. A lot of these charges of quote unquote racism are basically Beijing's propaganda points. And so we have to understand that they are manipulating us in that way. And we're going to have to get over a lot of those views, because if we don't, we're going to lose our country.
Strong words. It's going to be a hard cultural change for us. But I do think that Donald Trump is bringing hard truths out every single day. And obviously we're seeing this when we see the leftist media go crazy. But I think that those are hard truths that we need to learn, because we are a free nation, and we are very naive to how other regimes work.
I couldn't say it better. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon Chang. Thank you. And I want you to tell us your book and give us your Twitter handle, because I want people to be out there following your X handle, whatever we're calling it now. I want people to make sure that they can follow you, because this is such important stuff. They need to know where it's coming from and how to continue to follow what you're saying.
Yeah. My X handle is at Gordon G. Chang, GordonGchang. And I archive all my articles for free on my website, which is www.GordonChang.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tudor.
And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or if you want to watch the video, you can check it out at Rumble at Tudor Dixon. And join us next time. Have a blessed day.